What's up, guys? Welcome back. Before I get into anything, I want to draw attention to the shirt that I'm wearing. It says Hold the Heat. It is from my friend Casey Barb. Now, Casey, I've known Casey since, 2010, maybe 2011, when I was living up in the Finger Lakes, New York. He was living in Rochester. We connected through lifting. I went out and trained with him and our buddy Joe, and we all kind of became good friends. And later on down the line, he and I did a powerlifting competition together, and pledged a certain amount of, we would each deadlift a certain amount of weight, lift a certain amount of weight, so that we could raise money for Boston after the bombing in Boston at the marathon. And now I'm going to do my best attempt, at least on this episode, to help raise a little money for him. These shirts, he sells them on his website because Casey has stage 4 colon cancer, and his treatments are the things that is what's keeping him alive right now. He has to go through brutal treatment. The last I talked to him was every other week, like debilitating. And he has a lovely wife. He has 2 kids, and he runs a great business called Tacticalories, a seasoning and sauce company. He's a great cook. Even more than that, he's a great dude, and the world's better having him around, and he's fighting his ass off. I've never seen somebody fight so hard to overcome a disease, to overcome cancer. And the only thing I'm going to ask of you today is go to his website. I'm going to link it in the show notes. Buy some kind of shirt. He has different shirts on there, different pieces of merch, and support his fight against stage 4 colon cancer, because the world's better with him here, and we can all do a little bit to help him out. The shirts aren't that expensive, so go buy a shirt, go buy one for your buddies, and they're all pretty cool. He gets cool designs made for the shirts. So only thing I'm going to ask of you today is that I'm not going to promote any of my shit. I'm just going to go through what I'm going to teach you today and ask you to go buy a shirt from Casey and help support him. So that's my spiel for today. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about how you ought to be training in March, and I'm going to give you that information based on what we're doing in Pack Mule with Backcountry Ready and Pathfinder. Now, why do I say this is how you ought to train in March? Well, I'll tell you what. If I didn't think it was the best thing to be doing right now for hunters, I wouldn't be doing it. You know what I mean? So I'm going to walk you through what we're doing, because the setup is appropriate to get pretty much any backcountry mountain hunter, or any hunter that wants to be in incredible shape to do whatever they want to do. It's what you ought to be doing right now. And so March, this whole month leading into April, most of this month leading into April, is the last phase of our early off-season program. Then we'll transition into the late off-season, then we'll go into preseason. So phase 3 of most of our programs are transitional phases, right? So if you look at phase 3 at this program, it leads into the next phase. So we're kind of introducing some of the things that the raw materials that we'll need to be successful in the next phase, to build on that, to build into preseason. And then preseason, we kind of lead into the last little tip off that we need to go into the season. And then the cycle continues as we go year round. And so right now we're heading into a little bit of a transitional phase. The things that are staying from the last time I did one of these How You Ought to Train podcast is the accrual of aerobic volume. We're still doing a lot of that. And honestly, you know, everyone, all of us that are strength and endurance focused should maintain a good amount of aerobic training year round. Now, why? Because most of us are just normal folks, right? Like, we have normal jobs, we have families, we have things that we have to do. We're not professional athletes that are going out and doing 8, 10 plus hours of training in our build-up seasons and things like that. So for us to accrue the amount of aerobic volume that we need, and to continue to improve our aerobic system year after year, we have to continue to get that volume. Now, there are specific points throughout the year when we focus more on it and we try to get more of it in. And this is one of those times a year where we want people to accrue it. So we have a lot of it distributed throughout the week. Another change with our conditioning this time, though, is we're progressing in intensity and we're adding in more intensity so that, well, we need it. We're starting to get to the point where we have to add it in. It also lays the foundation for some of the more intense conditioning to come, and then it will help us transition into the specific work that we will do during the summer, right? So we're building raw materials now, so we can take those raw materials and apply them to the specific training that we're going to do later in the year. From a strength training perspective, when we talked last time about this, we had options, right? So we had one main strength day that everybody did. The second strength day was either muscular endurance based or just straight up strength based. We don't have that option now. We did that for 2 months. So we had 8 weeks where if someone was really strength deficient, they had 2 opportunities to do direct, what you might call regular strength training. Now, is it going to look exactly like traditional strength training that you might have seen in like Muscle and Fitness or bodybuilding.com or T Nation back in the day? Maybe T Nation, but no. It looks more like athletic strength training because that's what we need. It's not going to be, deadlifting and then high volume hamstrings and all that kind of shit. But it's just still regular strength training, not muscular endurance phase, type work. This phase, it's one strength day, one muscular endurance day for everybody. And the reason being because we're going to start transitioning into training where that muscular endurance foundation that we have now, that's more general, is going to be applied more specifically. So we have to build what we need for that now. So we have the raw materials going into that so that we can get more out of our specific training. So that's one change that we made. We have strength A. Our strength A is just a straight up strength day. And why are we doing that? We need the output. We need the relative strength. We need to, and it gives us the base to move into some more of the strength endurance work that we're going to do later in the later off-season phases and carry it on into the preseason. So we need that strength phase. We also have to have periods throughout the year where we focus on pushing our strength a little bit. Now, is it as important to us right now as our aerobic base? If you put a gun to my head and you said, you got to make a decision, Todd. It's either going to be aerobic building or strength for someone right now, I would find a way to cheat, to be honest. As I would have people just ruck and do it aerobically and do it on an incline. If you had a gun to my head and that's the decision I make. Luckily, that's not the decision that we have to make. I have the ability to draw on a lot of different methods, principles, applications, and blend them together into a more comprehensive program. So, however, strength this time of year is still going to be really important because we want to push our strength ceiling before we get into more strength endurance work, which will help us carry over into the preseason and build what we need going into the season. So we're doing that. One of the things that we did change about our strength A workout is we changed the way that we're doing power work for this training phase. Now, why? We're doing more what are called cyclical power intervals. And so they last a little bit longer. So it's not just jumping, it's not just throwing, it's not any of that kind of stuff. We're doing something that asks our members to express power for a longer period of time. Why? We're priming the ability of our nervous system for output, both so we can get more out of intense conditioning coming down the line, and so we can extend how long we can express power, and to be somewhat protective before we go into more intense conditioning, because we are synchronizing. So when I do this shit, I try not to like get too technical into some of the terminology, and so like as I'm saying some of the stuff, I'm trying to think of like what's the easiest way to say this so I don't sound like some jargon mouth asshole. So we're essentially just priming the body to be able to handle more intense training coming down the line over an extended period, because we're going to go into VO2 max intervals and stuff in the early off season, or I mean the later off season phases. And listen, the VO2 max I think is way oversold, right? Like trying to push your VO2 max, first of all, it doesn't last that fucking long, and second of all, it's not a very good indicator of performance at all. Like, we know that some of the best endurance athletes in the world, as they go on, their VO2 max actually decreases, but their performance increases. It's not a good measure of performance. However, some aspects of VO2 max training give us other adaptations that are useful to us. Like, so for example, some VO2 max training can help maximize cardiac output. And so we're going to do it in a way that helps us maximize cardiac output. I'm not so worried about pushing our VO2 max at all. And we're only doing a little dose of it, just enough to top off all of the aerobic training that we've done leading up to this point in the year. So we're doing these extended cyclical power intervals to help prime us for that, but also give us more access to our power over time. Okay. But we're keeping the main lift. So I'm having everybody, whichever main lift they chose for the first two training phases of this training block, they're keeping it for this one. Why? You get way more efficient, right? So if you're constantly changing exercises, you don't get as efficient with the exercise. You're not as skilled. And if you stick with that exercise for longer, while the volume and intensity of that exercise changes, you actually get more coordination, so you can have greater output. If you're better with the lift, you're going to have more output. If you're constantly have to learning, redialing your form, do all of that kind of shit, then your output isn't going to be as high. So I want people to keep the same lift throughout all these phases. Now, during the first week, we just came off a deload week. This is actually the first week of this program. We came off of a deload week. We're doing kind of a reintroduction to intensity week. And then next week will be actually like the peak intensity and volume, not full volume, but highest volume of the highest intensity throughout the entire training block, right? So we built up to that. It'll be our week 2 next week of the highest intensity and highest volume. And then there'll be a higher volume week after that, but not as much intensity. So that's kind of like we've built up to this big strength push next week with the same exercise over. And this is all bilateral stuff. So people have the option, depending on the outcomes of their testing, if they're in backcountry ready, if they're in Pathfinder, they can choose based on some of the coaching notes that I give them. It's all bilateral stuff, and that means both legs. So options are front squats, hex bar deadlift, barbell RDL, Zercher squat, goblet squat, rack pull deadlift. Those are our options for these lifts, so that you continue to build skill with those. Now, I personally have front squatted this whole time because that's going to have the biggest impact on my uphill and downhill performance. I could go and deadlift and pull a bunch of weight, but it's not going to make the most difference for me. And in a lot of cases, if you're strong enough, the deadlift isn't going to push your strength for uphill and downhill the way that you need to. Will it make you stronger generally? Absolutely. But as we look at how we want things to carry over to going up and down a mountain, front squats are going to make a way bigger difference for that. And so if people are adequate with the deadlift and we know that their strength ceiling is high enough, we push people to squat more. So like Zercher squat, front squat, you can load them relatively heavy. You listen to this, maybe like back squats, maybe you've back squatted a lot in your life. Why don't I have them? I don't think the risk is worth the reward, right? So most people don't have the raw materials to back squat well. You need really good thoracic mobility, your upper back. You need great hip mobility. You need great ankle mobility, and you need great actual limb proportions to do it really well. So if you're like me and you're built like Jiminy Cricket and you have these long legs and short torso, it's very difficult to get into a good position that isn't potentially injurious with the back squat. So it just doesn't make any sense to me to program them for people because we don't need them. Also, you get more out of a front squat from a core training perspective, okay, which we need, right? Because the better are the anterior aspect of our core. So what most people would think of their abs works, the better we can support our spine and the better we can support our pack. So we do a lot of anterior squatting. If someone has a safety bar, I'm fine with that because it doesn't require as much out of your shoulders and out of your thoracic spine. So I really like to do split squats with the safety bar. I think not last summer, but 2 summers ago, I worked up to doing 400 pounds for sets of 2 with safety bar split squats, rear foot elevated safety bar split squats. And, it was a great strength stimulus for uphill and downhill work, but I like to avoid barbell back squatting. It's the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We're doing ankle mobility work with that because it supports the squat, and you've likely heard me talk about this before. We just need a lot of ankle mobility, both for moving uphill and for moving downhill, for going side hill and all that kind of stuff. So we build ankle mobility into it. Then we're going into assistance lifts, just relatively straightforward, heavier single leg work and single limb work, single arm work, to balance out the body, but also increasing, our strength and our output there. And then built in with that is our hip flexor strengthening progression. And so one of the things besides direct calf work, which we do a fair amount of, the hip flexors are just way too neglected. I mean, people will do sit-ups and things like that, but it doesn't target them in the way that really develops them for what we need for driving uphill, for stabilizing our body, for stepping over shit, for stepping under shit. So we are progressing our hip flexor work in with those exercises, and that's where we also include our heavy calf work. So we do heavy calf work on that day. And then at the end, we do a CARS cool down. So CARS stands for controlled articular rotations. It's essentially a joint circle that's slow so that you build control in that joint while moving it through a full range of motion, both because it makes the tissues healthier, but then your nervous system communicates well with that joint, so that if you get into an awkward position, you've been there before, and the chance of the injury being as bad decreases, but also you just move better because you're taking your joints through full ranges of motion. So we start from the standing up at the top joints and work down through our body until we get down to the floor. Okay. Now, our second strength workout of the week is straight up muscular endurance, but not slow twitch muscular endurance, more of a fast twitch approach. And we use high intensity continuous training, which if you've read anything that I've written or listened to things that I've talked about, followed us on Instagram, any of that kind of stuff, it's something I talk about a lot. It's designed to increase the aerobic capacity of fast twitch muscles. So we're doing that with 2 different exercises for long sets this time. We did 2 short sets last phase. We're doing 1 long set this phase because we're building up to doing longer muscular endurance work, more continuous work, which is something that we're going to have to do when we're out in the field. We're also on that day, we've progressed our aerobic plyometric work, which is building up the endurance of our lower legs. So making them more reactive, making our feet stronger, making our calves stronger, making our ankles stronger, both so we save energy as we move up and downhill, but also from a protective measure to be able to handle the stress of walking for days at a time up and downhill. Even if you're including running in your program, it's going to help with things like that to make your lower legs and your feet more resilient, and just improving and maintaining like general athleticism, which as hunters we need, but also just as people, like maintaining these basic motor skills that are built into these aerobic plyometrics is huge for people. So we did the same exercises for 2 months, and I just built up the volume. Now this, I changed the exercises, and we're sticking with 1 exercise at a time for a full minute, and we're doing 5 of them. So 5 total minutes. Sticking with 1 exercise essentially increases the intensity of it, because as you continue to do that 1 exercise, the relative intensity of it increases because you start to build up a little bit of fatigue. We want to move through it continuously, but if we can't, we have breaks built in so people can take a break between exercises. But this is huge. We've been using this for quite a while now in different formats, and I used to use it. I used it with guys in the NFL and all kinds of stuff to build up the resiliency to get through for them long seasons, and for us long hikes up and down hill, potentially for weeks at a time. So it's a really useful tool. Like I said, we're doing high intensity continuous training for our muscular endurance work. We're working on fast switch rough stuff right now, because not only is this a muscular endurance stimulus because we're increasing the aerobic capacity of our fast twitch muscle fibers, but it's also a strength endurance stimulus, which trains our nervous system for higher output and better recruiting of our muscles over time, our fast twitch muscle fibers over time. So that's the big difference between strength endurance and muscular endurance as I define it. Muscular endurance, we want to think locally, like we're increasing the locally it would be within the muscles. We're increasing the muscles' ability to contract over time within the things that we're building in the muscles. Strength endurance, we're training our nervous system to fight fatigue, to continue to send strong signals to those muscles so they contract. So that would be the delineation. With high intensity continuous training, you get a little bit of both. And so we're kind of building a bridge there as we do that, right? So we want to make our fast twitch muscles more resilient. Also, think about it from an oxygen perspective. So a lot of us are going to go into situations where the oxygen gradient changes because we're going to higher elevations than what we typically live at. And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've read studies on this that say that this is how it works, but from a logical perspective, the more efficient we make our body at using oxygen, the better, because we're going into a situation not where there's less oxygen, there's the same amount of oxygen, but we have less access to it based on the pressure changes as you climb in elevation. So it's kind of a threefold thing there. We're increasing our ability to use oxygen, our fast twitch muscle fibers. It would be type 2A fibers, because your type 2X fibers are kind of not really, they don't get trained aerobically all that well, but your type 2A fibers will. And so that's what we're addressing here, right? So we have to maintain the intensity in the right place, because if we get going too fast, we get our heart rate too high, we're going to be getting out of aerobic zone and getting more into anaerobic zone, and we're going to rely more on type 2X fibers. So we have to stay at a relative intensity that maintains our ability to recruit type 2A fibers. This might sound in the weeds and like really complicated, but actually executing the stuff is really simple. I handle the complicated shit and all the thinking, and our folks just go get to execute on simple exercises. We're doing 2 simple exercises with a simple setup. We're doing either a 15-minute set of the one exercise and a 10-minute set of the other exercise, and we're doing 2 reps every 15 seconds. It's simple to execute. The thought behind it sounds more complicated and complex, but the doing is very, very simple. And then we're finishing that workout with some posterior chain work. Now, like I've talked about before, my philosophy with the posterior chain for hunters and uphill and downhill type folks is give it more volume, right? Because we need to build its resilience for pulling ourselves up the hill, not as much driving, while also supporting pack weight and things like that. And so for me, it makes more sense to build drive and strength more with squatting movements. And we also just need the quad resiliency. The first thing they're going to go is your quads. So making your quads resilient in every way is going to be the best thing to do. But we need that that continual pulling strength from our hamstrings and from our back and our glutes. So we do higher volume work with the back of our body. And so that's what we're finishing that workout with. So a form of hamstring curls, some rows, and then we're continuing our high volume calf work on this day. And instead of increasing the time, I kept the time the same, but the goal is to just do more work in that time. And that's what's called increasing the density of an exercise. You're trying to do more work in the same amount of time, which will improve muscular endurance and it can improve strength too. And so we're approaching it that way because there's no need to make that longer, right? Because I don't want to make the session any longer for people because it's not necessary. And second, we can get the same effect by just trying to increase the density of the work that we're doing in the same amount of time. So that's what we're doing. Now, as you look at our conditioning, like I said, there are different ways to accrue aerobic volume throughout the week. At this point in the year, starting to get the longer sessions in, though, is really important because that is what's really going to start to push our aerobic system forward. It's going to make it more stable so that we have less heart rate drift over time, which means we can stay aerobic for longer. And simply just staying in the zones is the thing that we want to do there. But, all these kind of things, good things happen. Like we continue to accelerate the adaptations that we get to aerobic training. So like things like cardiac output, things like increasing the triglyceride stores, intramuscular triglyceride stores. So we make fat more available. We improve our capillary beds, and we make ourselves more efficient at using fat for fuel, but also carbohydrates for fuel. because regardless if you're in zone 2, yeah, primarily you want to burn fat for fuel, but you're still going to be using carbohydrates as well. And so all of this just makes us way more fuel efficient. And so we need to really focus on getting in at least one longer session each week. So I increase the opportunities to get in those longer sessions. And for us, when I say longer session, it has to be more than an hour. So we have a couple opportunities to get, we have one opportunity to get in a 90-minute session. And then I have 75-minute sessions built in there as well. So people have opportunities to get that in. But at the end of the day, accruing aerobic volume is going to be important. So I gave a lot of opportunities throughout the week to do that for people. So we, like I think I mentioned in the last podcast we did like this, there's, optional 30-minute zone 1 and zone 2 sessions on the same day as the strength workouts. And then we have tiered, you select by time, right? So if you we have conditioning set up for, like I said, on the strength days, which are on Monday and Thursday, you can do those extra zone 1 and zone 2 sessions. And then on Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday, we have it laid out so that the member would select the amount of time that they do. So that way it's like, you look at it and you're like, well, I don't have time for an hour today, but I do have time for 45 minutes. And so rather than thinking getting into that trap of all or nothing thinking, there's still something that you can do, and accruing aerobic volume regardless, even if you don't exactly hit the goals we want to get, is going to be important. So we have all those opportunities built into it. Like I said, we have more opportunities for intense training this time. So if someone, last phase, we started introducing zone 3 work, right? To start preparing ourselves for more intense work, but also, we need to, doing some zone 3 work will help make your drift more stable. Believe it or not, it'll help you with your aerobic training, because if you look at zone 3, when you start to get there, it's about a 50-50 split between carbohydrate contribution and fat contribution. And so 50-50 split between anaerobic energy production and aerobic energy production. So it still helps your aerobic system, and while also making you more efficient at burning carbohydrates for fuel. So we have an opportunity to do that. We introduced it last month for the people that were ready for it, people that had a stable cardiac drift, people that were accruing enough training volume. They could start to incorporate some of the zone 3 work. So those folks that didn't quite get there last time can start to do that. Now, if someone's not accruing enough of the regular zone 2 and zone 1 and zone 2 work in other aspects of the week, they'll stick with just zone 1 and zone 2 work. But if they've got enough zone 1 and zone 2 work, they did the zone 3 work last month, I'm introducing lactate threshold intervals this month. Now, for our backcountry ready folks, week 1 this week, we're testing lactate threshold. So we know approximately where theirs is, so they can execute the session to the best of their ability. Now, we don't test in Pathfinder, but I give them recommendations based on intensity and what they might do to be able to approximate it as best as possible, but they don't get tested like our folks in backcountry ready do. Now, what is your lactate threshold? It is the line between your zone 3 and your zone 4. So that is where you shift from primarily producing energy, or it shifts from that 50-50 split to primarily producing energy anaerobically. Why would we do this? It still makes our aerobic system more stable by being able to work at that high intensity, but then it also gives us the ability to work at that higher intensity with lower cost to our body. So all of this is building the raw materials so that as we get into the preseason, we can do these longer duration sessions that might be a little bit more intense than usual. And first of all, get better adaptations out of it. But second of all, have them not murder us. You know what I mean? So we can still recover from them and get the rest of the training in that we're gonna get done. So those are introduced for people that are ready for them as well. So we're testing it in 2 different ways. We'll test it on an incline treadmill for folks who have access, and if folks don't have access to an incline treadmill, we'll do it on the bike. Now, is that necessarily the most specific transfer? No, but we have to work with what's practical and not necessarily what's optimal all the time. So we'll do that, and then we'll progress the amount of that training throughout the course of the month, and it'll actually bleed into phase 3 before we transfer into more intense intervals. Why are we doing it that way? Because we want to, when you look at pushing your lactate threshold, to start to get the adaptations, you need somewhere between 16 and 25 total minutes in a session. And so we're looking at minimum effective dose, but we're walking up the length of time in our intervals so we make that more stable, right? So we're doing just enough to get the effect of it, and then maintaining a volume that's relatively stable, but lengthening the amount of the intervals so it makes the actual, we get the adaptation, and it makes us more stable at that intensity without giving ourselves too much of it. Now we're not ultra runners, we're not any of those people, so and we're not doing high rocks or any of that kind of shit. So we don't need a ton of time at lactate threshold. We just need some. Most of what we'll do as hunters, we're going to be in zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And so those are the things that we need to primarily give our training to. But this is still helpful for overall energy efficiency and keeping our aerobic system stable as we climb in higher intensities. So that's why we do it. This is also a time when we're starting to say, hey, we've been very general up to this point, pretty general up to this point with what we're choosing for our aerobic training. So, running, biking, different things like this. But now I'm coaching people to start to incorporate their pack more often and to get on inclines more often, because we're going to start increasing the volume of that specific work as we get into the late off season and into the preseason. So that's another change that we're making. Packs are still relatively light right now. So some people are ready for a 20% pack. The people that haven't accrued enough volume over time, they're still at like a 15% body weight pack, which is totally fine. It's enough. You'll start to adapt, you'll accrue the volume, and you'll eventually, as you progress, you'll walk up the slope of the incline, and you'll increase the pack weight. And doing it that way allows you to adapt without giving your body too much stress at the same time, at one time, and also keeping you efficient while you do it. So that's why we progress it that way. I wrote an article not long ago about how to get started with pack training for hunting. And it's really just change one variable at a time, because otherwise you start to get bad habits, you start to get inefficient, both from a gait standpoint, from a breathing standpoint, from a posture standpoint. And so we're progressively doing that. So we maintain efficiency, not just energetically, but also with how we move, which will contribute to our efficiency energetically. And also so we avoid beating the absolute piss out of ourselves, because it's not productive. We don't need to do that. So the big things overview wise are: one strength day, one muscular endurance day, still accruing as much aerobic volume as we possibly can throughout the week while doing our absolute best to get a long session. And if folks are at the point where they can get 90-minute sessions in, that's going to be huge, because as we get later into the year, we want to see longer sessions, right? Because we want to make our aerobic system more stable over time. We want to continue to develop it as much as we can, both as hunters and as people, but also it gets to be more specific for what we do, right? Like we will walk all day, whether we're hunting, we're hiking in, we're hiking out, we need it. So that's happening. We're progressing the intensity, and we're doing it in different ways based on what people are ready for, especially in Backcountry Ready, with specific testing. And then in Pathfinder, I'm giving them guidelines based on maintaining the intensity and if they know their zones where they need to be. Now, quick note on lactate threshold training. To make it work, you need to be about at your lactate threshold or a little bit above it into zone 4 by like 5 beats, because then we start to train your body to, recycle the products of that. So actually recycling your lactate so that it gets turned back into fuel that you can use, so it doesn't hang out in the muscles and build up and signal fatigue. So we're training our body to clear those things well. And to do that, you have to get up to threshold, and you have to stay there or above it for the total amount of time. The interval breakdowns are different, and it depends on people's fitness levels. It's like really, really fit ultra runner type people, they'd have to stay there for longer, but at the same rate, the fitter you are, a lot of times the more careful you have to be, because you can dig yourself a deeper hole. So like, for example, a lot of these ultra runners, they'll go out and run a race, and you'll see their heart rate, and they'll be in zone 2 for most of it. And you're like, wow, they're only in zone 2. But what you have to understand is they're so efficient that zone 2 is a higher intensity for them than it is for us. So they can cause a lot more muscular damage by working in zone 2 than a person like you or I can, who are pretty fit, but we're not at that elite level like that. So it's all a balance of making sure that you're doing the right kind of volume for you at the time. And whatever, if nothing else, just default to easy to moderate aerobic training and getting as much of it in as you possibly can while doing a strength day and a muscular endurance day. And if you can follow that balance, you'll still continue to make progress if you're not confident with how to start to introduce more intense training into your program. Okay? That's what I got for this episode. That's how we're training right now, because I think it's the best way to go about things. And in the future, as I continue to learn and grow as a coach, I'll change things as I see fit. But this is a solid setup. It's what I think the best thing is to do right now. And so that is what we're doing, and that is what we will always do. So as always, I appreciate you watching and listening. If you have questions, I still plan on doing the Q&A episodes, so you can send those in. And